Welcome back to First Move. U.S. stocks remain on track for a mostly lower open this Thursday. Blue chips, however, are trying to move higher. The Dow begins the session above 29,000 for the first time since February. Nasdaq stocks are under the most pressure pre-market, with Apple and Tesla set to pull back further from records. Before the bell, the U.S. reported that an additional 881,000 Americans filed for first-time claims last week, the first drop below 1 million since early August. This comes after a weaker-than-expected read on private sector jobs growth yesterday. The all-encompassing U.S. jobs report will be released tomorrow. Also before the bell, the U.S. reporting that the trade gap surged by more than 18% in July, thanks to an almost 11% rise in imports. Seth Harris joins us live now. He's the former acting U.S. Secretary of Labor under President Obama. Thank you so much for being with us. So let's just talk about these initial jobless claims coming in at 881,000 for this week. How do you interpret these numbers? Obviously, they were seasonally adjusted, but they do still represent a decline technically compared to last week.
Well, only technically, though, Zane. In reality, the actual number of claims filed increased slightly, and overall, about 1.6 million American workers filed for some kind of unemployment benefits last week. The more troubling number inside this report that we got from the Labor Department today is that 29.2 million Americans are receiving some kind of unemployment benefit. That's about 1 in 5 American workers. So we are still in a very, very, very deep economic hole in the United States. Workers are struggling to crawl out of it. They are not succeeding because they're not getting the help they need from their federal government.
Right, because of the stimulus bill not yet being passed. So 29.2 million Americans needing help, needing some form of assistance. Just walk us through where you stand on just how this administration has handled this pandemic, especially from a labor market perspective.
The Trump administration has been catastrophically incompetent at managing the pandemic. We have had flare-ups around the country because they do not have a comprehensive national strategy. They don't have a national testing and contact tracing strategy. They don't have a national personal protective equipment strategy so that our frontline workers and others who are going back to work can be safe. And the pandemic is continuing to kick around the United States. We're losing 1,000 people to pandemic coronavirus deaths almost every day now. People are scared. They're not willing to interact with one another. Different parts of the country are shutting down and reopening, and there's just not regular ability to engage in commerce with one another. And as a consequence of that, the economy is in terrible, terrible trouble. The stock market is booming, but workers are suffering. It's sort of a K-shaped recovery. The wealthy are getting wealthier. Working people are struggling and declining and losing their wealth because the Trump administration simply has no plan, absolutely no plan, either for the pandemic or for the economy.
And so, the one plan that President Trump does have, just if you're using his words, if you're judging by his words, is that if he is reelected, he says that he will create 10 million jobs in the first 10 months. How realistic is that, do you think?
It's definitely not going to happen if President Trump is reelected. He has no strategy. He has no thought behind that plan. It's just, as has often been the case with the Trump administration, sort of throwing numbers at the wall to see if they can get people to buy into them. It's a marketing plan. It's not an economic plan. And so what we really need to do is to think about what is going to be required once we are able to get the pandemic under control. What's going to be required to rebuild the American economy? We're going to need an aggressive investment in infrastructure. We're going to need to make a climate change investment so that the economy can shift to a lower carbon footprint. We're going to need big investments in education, big investments in the caring economy, taking care of elders and younger people so that we can liberate more people, particularly women, to get into the workforce. That's the kind of aggressive national plan that we need to have. But simply throwing out numbers and making a bunch of empty promises that are not going to be kept, which is this administration's strategy, is not going to work to actually help working people.
You talked about just the importance of the stimulus bill, just because, 29 million Americans are in dire straits now and need help. What is the most important area which that money should be spent in order to get people, either help working families or get them back into the labor force? Is it the unemployment insurance, that $600 a week might be coming in from the federal government at slightly less? Or is it the small business PPP? What are your thoughts?
This problem is so gigantic that there's no one silver bullet, but no question about it, restoring the $600 supplemental unemployment benefit is critically important. When President Trump and Senate Republicans allowed that money to expire, they pulled billions of dollars out of the economy every week. But we also need to provide additional loan support to true small businesses, not the cronies and friends of people in the Trump administration. But we need to help small businesses bridge this gap until they're able to get back to work. We also need to look at some of the industries that are in a grave risk of collapsing in the United States. The airline industry is talking about tens of thousands of layoffs at the end of September. Their unions have been working with them to try to get Congress to focus on the kind of investments they need to make in the airline industry and other industries that are at risk of collapse. And most important, let me just say, I don't want to leave this out because this is very important. State and local governments need the support of the federal government. State and local governments cannot borrow to fill in a deficit in their spending. So they're having to dramatically cut services. They're laying off large numbers of people, more than 1.5 million over the last several months. That is going to slow our economic recovery, and it's going to deprive people in our communities of the support that they need. So there's a long list of things we need to get engaged on at the federal level. But let me just say, Congress has failed because Senate Republicans and the White House are unwilling to meet the House Democrats halfway. Speaker Pelosi has said, we'll agree to cut our request. You need to come up a little bit in your request. That's how bargaining works. But apparently the world's greatest deal maker is not able to make a deal in this space.
Well, then how much money do you think is needed? Because Senate Republicans are saying that they're willing to spend $1 trillion this time around. Obviously, the Democrats want more than that. But what do you think it's going to really take to get the economy, especially the labor market, back on track?
I strongly prefer the House Democrats' HEROES Act, which would have invested $3.4 trillion in the economy. That is the size of problem that we are encountering right now. This is a $21 trillion economy, and we have months and months and months of depressed economic activity, and we have huge needs. There are millions of Americans who are food insecure. We have schools that want to be open but safe. We have workplaces that want to be open but safe. We have 29.2 million people who are out of jobs and need to be able to support their families because there are no jobs for them to find. And so we need to do a lot more, not a lot less. So negotiating down from $1 trillion, which is apparently what Senate Republicans are doing, they've gone down from $1 trillion to a skinny, what they call a skinny bill of $500 billion. Now, in the real world, that's a lot of money, but in an economy the size of the United States, that's just a pittance, and it's not going to get us through even for a few weeks. We need a big, bold, courageous investment from people who put the country first.
All right, we hope that both sides are able to come to an agreement soon, because a lot of people's families and livelihoods are at stake, especially minorities, working poor, people of color. Seth Harris, former acting U.S. Secretary of Labor under President Obama, thank you so much for being with us.